Good afternoon. I think my voice projects good enough, so I won't use the microphone unless there's someone who's got geriatric hearing like I have. Okay. Protected areas are at risk of deproclamation, particularly at the whims of politicians. Therefore, an important or essential conservation strategy is to have layers of legal protection under different pieces of law, such as cultural heritage or international conventions such as Ramsar or the World Heritage Convention, which I think is the strongest instrument. That would make deproclamation difficult and protracted. Some natural places are just so special and important that their protection is of concern to the peoples of the world. And this concern extends to many such places in Africa, as expressed at international meetings some 10 years ago for potential and existing World Heritage Sites. For example, the 2003 World Parks Conference and the World Heritage Convention meeting, the principal concerns that came out of that were that Africa is lagging behind in nominating World Heritage Sites. Some African countries had yet to ratify the World Heritage Convention, and Africa, unfortunately, heads the list of World Heritage Sites in danger. Botswana ratified the World Heritage Convention in 1998. Similar to many other African countries, Botswana made little progress towards compiling nomination dossiers for identified World Heritage sites, for example, the Okavango Delta. There are many reasons for this. The most important was a general lack of capacity and understanding at an international level of comprehension. For this reason, the Africa World Heritage Fund was established. In 2004, the IUCN undertook a gap analysis and produced a strategic paper that identified habitat types poorly represented on the World Heritage list. And that included flooded grasslands such as in the Okavango Delta and the Sud. Training courses were sponsored by the African World Heritage Fund, the Centre for Heritage Development in Africa, and the Ministry of Tourism, Environment, Culture of Lesotho. Course objectives were to ensure the development of nomination dossiers for submission to the World Heritage Centre in Paris from African state parties to the convention. To assist, resource persons were identified during the workshop, and 2 South Africans were identified, which was Guy Palmer from Cape Nature and myself from Ezemvelo. The Okavango Delta lies in the sand-filled Kalahari Basin created by tectonic movements 40,000 years ago that captured the Okavango River, forcing it to spread out across the Kalahari desert sands. It has no outlet to the sea. All the water sinks into the sand or is lost to evaporation. Its waters originate in the highlands of Angola, arriving at the delta at the height of the dry season. The delta area is in the order of 20,236 square kilometers. That, by comparison, is larger than the Kruger National Park. It is made up of permanent swamps, islands, and seasonally flooded grasslands and sustain large populations of animal species. The perennial cycle of flooding and dehydration continually maintains and shapes this vast ecosystem. There are few people, and the delta remains in pristine condition, mostly without roads or other forms of development and transformation. Moremi Game Reserve lies at the core of the World Heritage Site, with private managed wildlife areas making up most of the remainder. The water volume averages at 93 cubic kilometers. The highest recorded, was 16.3 cubic kilometres. That's a bit of water. The floods stimulate new growth that attracts herds of elephants, grazing ungulates and predators, and birds from a wide catchment at a critical time of the year. Some of the very special species that are found there, birds and mammals. There's a number of luxury tourist lodges. Most are accessible only by private air charter. Although the Okavango Delta had been an international conservation priority for more than 30 years, officials lacked technical information to support the criteria. They had no statement of outstanding universal values or a boundary description, and stakeholders and community had not been approached. They still had to address a host of matters that could affect the ecological integrity of the proposed site. For these reasons, Botswana delegates were formally advised to acquire the services of mentor and advisor. However, progress to protect and conserve the Delta system had been made over the years. Moremi Game Reserve being proclaimed in 1964 and was expanded in 1974. Okacom, which is an agreement between Angola, Namibia and Botswana, established in 1994 in terms of managing the catchment and the waters of the Okavango system. It was declared a Ramsar site in 1997, and Botswana had its first World Heritage Site listed in 2001, which was Sodila Hills as a cultural site. The protocols of SADC, particularly the Shared Water Protocol and the Wildlife Conservation and Law Enforcement Protocol, were in place. Okavango Management Plan, thank goodness, was prepared and implemented from 2008, and Botswana had established the Okavango Delta World Heritage Working Committee. The Botswana government appointed the mentor in October 2010, who attended the first committee meeting in February 2011. And at that meeting, the criteria for listing the sites were agreed to. That was the aesthetic criteria, a superlative natural phenomena being present. The process criteria, where you looked at unique geomorphological, climatic, biotic, and micro processes, all interacting in interdependent processes. Criteria 10 was the biodiversity criteria, with a rich species diversity, threatened and endemic species being present. I identified many constraints that explained why the working committee was stagnating and there was little progress. The main reason was that the person who was charged with the responsibility was single-handedly bearing the full burden and had no authority over officials outside of her department. Most officials were just too junior, lacking understanding and capacity, and failed to report back to their supervisors. Thank goodness I work for government. Matters still requiring attention were that the boundary and buffer zone issues had to be resolved. There was no identification of the management authority for the Delta. What about the assurance of a sustained water supply to the system? There were mining threats. Botswana was rampant in terms of allocating prospecting rights, and consultation with stakeholders and communities still had to take place. Eventually these were resolved, and the final nomination dossier was sent to Paris. However, more information on the boundaries was required, which caused a year's delay before the evaluation mission could take place to the Delta. The IUCN evaluated the site in October 2013, and Dr. Peter Howard, and who some of us, George, will remember, worked in the Drakensberg, and Dr. Alan Wheeler. However, after going around and having a very nice time, looking at biodiversity, I might add. The evaluation mission requested more information. They were particularly unhappy about the boundary for the site. Departmental officials were assisted by US aid staff of the Southern African Regional Environmental Program that supported the sustainable development of the Okavango River Basin in defining and amending the site boundaries. Peace Parks revised the map. The rights of the first people, the San, the minority, who had sacred islands, access to resources in the Okavango Delta, they felt they were being marginalized because the political system in Botswana was to recognize all people as citizens of Botswana, not looking at specifically minority groups and their traditional rights. The solution, which was a difficult one, because you can't change national policy just like that, was to rather address it in this management plan for the site and allow these groups to identify sacred sites and particularly to have the rights of access of harvesting resources in particular areas. That was acceptable to the IUCN and the World Heritage Committee. The outstanding matters, thank goodness, were addressed in time. There are currently 228 natural and mixed World Heritage, UNESCO World Heritage sites, found only in 96 countries, covering 279 million hectares. That is 23% of the 1,007 listed World Heritage sites currently. In June 2014, the Okavango Delta was honoured and listed as the world's 1,000th UNESCO World Heritage Site. Remembering, of course, that the first site to be listed was the Galapagos Islands. To ensure protected areas in African countries remain safe in perpetuity, the authorities for these parks must, I believe, increase their protection in law and, if appropriate, use international instruments as well, such as the World Heritage Convention, to have that additional layer of protection. To succeed, the political leadership of such countries and their officials must be determined to make that happen. That is, World Heritage has to be an objective of government, and political support for the process must be in place. And for our World Heritage sites in South Africa, thank goodness for that, and what persons like Vali Musa, the minister at the time, did. The African World Heritage Fund model has been proven with its components of training and selection of mentor and advisor. However, for many African countries, support funding from outside agencies is invariably required. A strategic plan must be developed. That is the formulation and compilation of the nomination dossier. Officials, they must accept, cooperate and act, critical. And my last concluding remark is about experts and scientists. For heaven's sake, don't go off at tangents. Stay on the point. Thank you.